Okay, so you recently held the Commvault SHIFT event, and before we drill down into some of the specifics, it'd be just good to understand how, the overall feeling after it, how it went.
Yeah, really good, Phil. It was a really big event for us, a global event, although it's hosted in the UK, which is quite nice to have our CEO Sanjay over with all of our product engineering teams as well, making some big announcements. Normally happens in New York, this time happened in London. The announcements were well received by customers, by partners, by analysts and the press thus far. So that's really good. We're really doubling down on announcements we made, which we called Shift, pretty much this time last year. So it's become an annual event for us to go and talk a lot about the new innovations in Commvault and how we see the market dynamics.
Okay, and if I've read the reports right from the event, the main launch was Cloud Rewind. So it'd be good to understand sort of what that is and the benefits that it's bringing to or going to be bringing to your users.
Yeah, sure. I think the big thing we focused on is around something we're calling continuous business. And so that is, think of that as a paradigm shift in how organizations stay resilient. I've grown up doing business continuity, which was more around the concept of bouncing back in the event of failures. And our point of view is that needs to be redefined for multiple reasons. Number one, business continuity, I think in the past has been largely built around on-premise data centers and traditional applications. Number two, it's largely built around restoring or recovering your businesses from more traditional disasters like a hurricane, like a power outage, etc. So what's changed is customers, at least that I work with, are accelerating rapidly to the multi-cloud. So things aren't in one data center, they spread throughout multiple clouds, which are complex. And number two, the rise of ransomware and cyber attacks is probably what most organizations are fearing the most. So instead of designing your business to be continuous in the event of a flood, natural disaster, it's a lot more complex. So part of this umbrella of how we believe Commvault are best placed into making sure your business is continuous, it's inherently resilient against cyber attacks, even in the backdrop of multi-cloud complexity. We released a few things, as you mentioned, coming first, Cloud Rewind. Cloud Rewind is a doubling down of an acquisition we made April this year. And really in April this year, we purchased an organization called Appranix. And so what Appranix is relatively unique. What their superpower is all about is understanding your cloud infrastructure, all of the components that make up your cloud, not just the data. And so that what it allows organizations to do is literally like the rebranding called Cloud Rewind says, it allows them to rewind their cloud components, which, by the way, for those in the multi-cloud and can get really complex. You think of your load balancers, your network settings, all your configuration settings, all of those interdependencies. It allows organizations to rewind all of that infrastructure back in the public cloud to a point in time. So it makes them a lot more resilient and allows them literally, as I think the name says, rewind to points in time. And so we can recover not just the data, which has been what Commvault have done for 27 plus years, but now we can rewind all of those infrastructure components as one package solution, if that makes sense. And we can do that in multiple clouds, in Azure, in AWS, and in Google Cloud. So organizations can literally push the rewind button and go back prior to the outage. Could be a cyber attack, so they can go before the cyber attack and recover to a clean state, all the interdependencies, all the configuration of the cloud, and then roll forward their data.
Okay, I mean that's a bit mind-boggling to me. So I mean, without giving away the secrets, because as you say, there's a vast amount of complexity there. So in simple terms, or how can you explain how that actually works in practice? Because it sounds quite a complicated thing to achieve.
Yeah, as you build your environments in a public cloud, typically you have some form of subscription, and then you start building up these virtual components, and the virtual components and the interdependencies are stored. Appranix has the ability to crack that open and understand all of those components, read those components. So the first thing to what we do with Cloud Rewind is the ability to look in your cloud environment, inventory it, and understand all of those components and interdependencies. And we plug that into, as I said, Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. Once it's actually learned, which actually in its own right, when I've met with customers, they found that just that capability to read all my cloud components, all of its interdependencies, is got value just on its own right. So Cloud Rewind has that ability to go in and understand all of that, plugging into the cloud subscriptions and reading all the components, all the settings, all the interdependencies. It can actually create that straight as code, which is really useful. So where organizations, when they deploy infrastructure as code, they would sit and create the code or read the code to redo it in the future view. Cloud Rewind has the ability to build that code for them. But what we're doing with the ability to understand all the components, interdependencies, and then create it as code, the value we're using in Commvault Cloud is the ability to replay that. And so we've stored multiple versions of what we've read and understood, and you can select the version you want, and then just hit the forward button. And the forward button's reversing the read, it's doing the writing of those components. In demos, which I don't have now, you can actually see a rewind event in the cloud. You can actually see the components being populated in your cloud subscription.
Okay, and I'm also wondering, and apologies for a silly question, but does it have the ability, or might it in the future, to understand in real time what's going in the environment, so spot patterns and potentially what, say, well, we've seen this before and last time this happened,
Yes.
it wasn't good. Just what level of intelligence, I guess, is there now and might there be in the future?
Yeah, already what we released, some of the sub-bullets here is the ability to understand configuration drift. So if you think of us taking these, I think of them as snapshots of all your environment periodically. Already in Cloud Rewind, we released the ability to compare those snapshots and show me the difference. So you can say this is a golden snapshot, and then we can actually highlight all the components that have changed or drifted to try and avoid configuration drift. So I do see a view of that being a powerful combination in the future. When you have a cyber attack and you're starting to do forensics, if anything has changed in the components in the cloud, we can highlight those for you so that you can make those decisions in there. And I know, Phil, I'm jumping around a little bit. Part of what we launched in Commvault last year was something called Clean Room and Clean Room Recovery. So Clean Room Recovery is the ability to go and spin up a new tenant and do a clean recover on your data in the event of a cyber attack. So I see Cloud Rewind as forming an ecosystem with clean room recovery. So I do see the ability to recover a clean room. Already I've got customers using the clean room for 3 different scenarios. First scenario of a clean room, which can be with Appranix, Cloud Rewind. First scenario with a clean room is to do cyber recovery testing, which traditionally has been pretty intrusive to actually do a test. So the cloud is perfect in this instance to spin up an environment, go and actually recover the data and the applications. And where Cloud Rewind comes in is that ability to rapidly build a new cloud infrastructure for you automatically, then spin up those, restore the data, spin up those applications purely for testing, non-intrusive in the cloud. The second area, bolting onto that, if I can recover automatically to a clean state, I may want extra secure ops to do forensics. So spinning up a clean room to be a forensics room so that anybody can go do further analysis on data to see in the event of a cyber attack what's gone wrong. And then the final point is the obvious one, is actually using that clean room to recover to a known clean state so the data is all up and running and organizations can continue working. And the use cases are both on-premises data center customers leveraging the cloud for those three scenarios, or customers born in the cloud or have cloud SaaS applications or PaaS applications being able to go and do exactly that recovery capability.
Okay, and in terms of the clouds, I think you mentioned what we call the big three. Is that who you're working with at the moment, or are other clouds supported or will be supported? Because there are a few sort of independent ones that folks use as well.
Yeah, we do have a few independent clouds. Also, I forgot to mention Oracle. Oracle Cloud is also part of that area in the cloud environments. We have what Commvault's been pretty good at doing for so many years is we continue to grow our platform and our workload support, and that's something we think sets us apart as Commvault. Is we have support for some of the oldest legacy applications in data centers, all the way through to the new age SaaS applications that are deployed in the cloud. And so through that journey, there are cloud platforms which we support. Oracle springs to mind, and there are a few others, which I'm sure if you look on Commvault's website, I don't have in front of me, you'll find a few other cloud providers. There's probably another 10 further cloud providers supported in that mix.
Okay, and in terms of other bits and pieces announced at Shift, I think AWS and Google, I can't remember if it's related to what we just discussed or if it's slightly separate, but I think there were announcements with both AWS and Google Cloud in terms of what you're doing. So perhaps you can, tell us.
Yeah, if I zone in on AWS, the biggest announcement we made actually slightly before the event itself is a purchase of Clumio. So we acquired an organization called Clumio, and Clumio is a really specialist data management, backup and recovery solution for AWS. Their specialization and why it fits neatly into the Commvault portfolio is that they've really mastered in protecting petabytes, tens of petabytes of S3 storage in AWS, as well as DynamoDB. So thinking of workloads, especially the newer workloads, AI driven, which have got petabyte scale, Clumio has a very clever way of copying just the block changes on a regular basis to a isolated air-gapped environment. So winding back prior to the AWS announcements we made at our event, we did announce the acquisition of Clumio, which tucks neatly into our portfolio. It gives us, it boosts our AWS capability. It boosts our workload support for S3 and DynamoDB, which is unique in how they are protected at petabyte scale, which is really good for us, as well as it gives us some great engineering talent, which fold into Commvault to continue the multiple cloud solutions we have. On top of the Clumio announcement in AWS, we announced both our Air Gap Protect. Air Gap Protect is a immutable air-gapped storage environment that Commvault has. Traditionally, it's been available on Azure. We extended that same capability to allow organizations to have a very simple, just turn it on, air-gap immutable copy of data in AWS for recovery purposes. So we announced Air Gap Protect on top of AWS, and we announced Cleanroom, something I mentioned a little bit earlier, that Cleanroom capability. So now organizations can do a Cleanroom recover in Azure and AWS. So that was the big AWS announcements we made, Clumio plus Air Gap Protect and Cleanroom recovery in AWS, which is now really boosts up the multi-cloud capability for Commvault.
Yeah, and on the Google Cloud side, I think there was something as well.
Yeah, Google Cloud, the main areas we announced is all of the Google Docs, all of the Google Workplace capability to be protected as a SaaS native. So we now can protect that as a SaaS application in our Commvault Cloud as well. So that was the big announcement we made on Google. But on top of that, in Google, when we acquired Appranix, which is now Cloud Rewind, that has the same capability to read all the components and rewind your cloud infrastructure in Google. So that means that we've got the Google Workplace support, as well as we have Cloud Rewind in Google Cloud as well.
Okay, and so that's quite a lot of activity there already. Were there any other highlights worthy of mention from there in terms of introductions or just what was being discussed?
Yeah, the main other area I think is quite interesting. We've seen a big rise of demand for Active Directory protection. So what we're seeing is that when organizations have a cyber attack, the most critical application, one could argue, is actually Active Directory. It powers pretty much most enterprises and how they do business in the cloud or how their IT systems work. So if a bad actor comes in and does damage to Active Directory, that damage could be far-reaching and far wide and bring down the house, per se. So what we announced is on top of, we've actually identified quite some time ago Active Directory as a critical workload we protect and recover. So what we announced as well as part of this is what we call full Active Directory forest recovery, and that forest recovery playbook capability. So in the past, what we've always been able to do with Active Directory is recover all of the different components. We've also able to tell organizations what has changed, so you can identify changes you wouldn't like in Active Directory. And what we announced there is full Active Directory forest recovery. And that now sets us apart really in terms of Active Directory recover. But this playbook concept is to be able to really identify how you recover Active Directory, which is quite a complex process. It's a complex workload, but we playbook that. So you can simply make decisions. So anybody Active Directory, which is smart in it, can go through the various stages of the playbook and enable. Good example be recover all of my Active Directory to a clean room. That's a neat idea. And then reset all the passwords. And that can all be workflowed through the playbook of part of what we have in Commvault Cloud. So I think that's another notable announcement we made around there. And then the final piece there, something we've had for some time, we re-announced, is the doubling down on organizations that have vast amounts of distributed workloads and distributed data centers. Think of retail, where they could have data in small data centers, depots, shop stores, etc. And what we have there is something we call Hyperscale X, which is a very small turnkey appliance, which we can ship directly to these different locations. And that is hardened, secure, protects the data at that location, and they can send a copy of the data to the cloud. Of course, organizations in those retail can send data straight to the cloud, but we've had a rising request to say, let me store copies to recover locally, so they can have both. So that HSX Cloud is something we announced there as well.
Okay, and just on that trend, is that purely to give them a speed advantage when it comes to recovery? Is it that simple, or is there anything else going on?
Speed advantage, definitely. That's it. Also, perhaps complexity in network configurations as well. So it's very much a speed thing. Most of what you want to do is move the data off-site at some point, but there are circumstances where if something's gone wrong, a cyber attack, then you may want, you've got an immutable clean copy of the data. You want that to come locally to bring that store or depot online. You don't want to have to wait for it to come all the way from that cloud environment, which can have very slow network connectivity. So I think you're right, Phil. I think it's purely a speed thing that someone would do that. Otherwise, they would, if they could, send the data straight to the cloud and then recover from the cloud.
Okay, and I after everything that's gone on at Commvault SHIFT, I was going to ask you about the Clumio acquisition, but you've got there first. One other thing I know Commvault has done fairly recently is published their latest Cyber Recovery Readiness Report. So I suspect there's a lot of information there, but perhaps you can give us the sort of the highlights as to what it uncovered.
Yeah, sure. Phil, let me summarize it. I think the three key bullets, right, and I'll go into a few stats and some recommendations. One, our survey revealed that largely organizations are actually unprepared to recover from a cyber event, which is a bit concerning. Number two, when we surveyed let's say the functional individuals doing the day-to-day job and the leadership, the leadership acknowledged they weren't confident themselves to recover, not in the staff, just with the capabilities. And very few organizations actually test. Really beyond a tabletop exercise, very few test for a cyber recovery event. Those are the three big topics. If I go into some sub bullets, 83% experienced a material security breach. right? So over 80% of organizations acknowledged they had what they would call a material security breach. So that's a real testament that these things are happening more often than people may realize. 90% agreed that their cyber recovery plan has to be separate but part of a disaster recovery plan. So leading to this acknowledgement that cyber recovery is different from a disaster recovery around that. And then finally, 55% of organizations I mentioned earlier believed that the internal collaboration was lacking and they needed to really improve that internal collaboration and their plan for the cyber event. But if I move on to just quickly some of the key areas, what we then identified, right, in all of the various questions we asked, we identified 5 key markers from those organizations that were more successful recovering from a cyber event from those that were less successful. So 5 key markers of those. And what we noticed is that the most cyber recovery ready organizations, if there's such a phrase, would demonstrate 4 of the 5. So you need to really demonstrate 4 of these 5 key markers to be good at it. So the number 1 key marker was that organizations that invested in security tools to enable early warning about risk were better off. That also needed to include insider risk. And so that talks to some of the horrific stories where you hear of situations where you've had a breach and there's a dwell time. That's a time that someone's been in your organization for 200+ days, right? So that's that demonstrates a really poor posture in dealing with those. But organizations that were able to identify a breach early on were better at recovering from their capability. Obvious state there. Number 2, organizations that had a trusted, clean, dark site, right, immutable, air-gapped environment ready to be recovered were better off in that recovery scenario than those that were scrambling to do recovery in the existing compromised environment, whether that's cloud or data centers. So if you have a trusted, clean environment that you can then fast forward the trust in the infrastructure and the components and recover very, very quickly your data. Number 3 out of the 5, organizations that protected their protection were better off. What I mean by that is creating what we call an immutable copy of their backups, right? It is now known, it's almost a given that the cyber criminals will target 2 areas to start with. They'll target your security tools and they'll target your backup environment. That is your leverage. So organizations that protect their protection were better off in recovering. Number 4, organizations that had a run book that denotes cyber recovery, a big discussion, and that run book was more comprehensive, went from the organizational design, the roles and responsibilities, the communication plan, the processes for incident response, and then detailing the run book on recovering their environment were obviously better off versus those that, unfortunately, the incident was the first time they run the run book. And then finally, those that really demonstrated specific measures on cyber recovery readiness were better off. So actually identifying that cyber recovery is a key point and that you have key measures. And one of those measures will be a comprehensive testing regime and plan. Those were far better off. So I think that's quite a lot, Phil, but that's a lot of trying to simplify what the survey revealed.
And just following up that I think the 3 sort of high level bullet points you gave. The first one, I think you said whether it was the majority or a surprising amount of people thought or said they were unprepared. I mean, bearing in mind, I don't know how long you've been in the storage industry, but I've been in it a long time. And even back then, everyone was talking about, the need for business continuity, disaster recovery, and now, cyber resilience. Are you surprised and even a bit depressed that still large amounts of people admit to being unprepared?
Yeah, it is. I guess depressed more than surprised. I think the big reveal is, and I know that in my career when I started out in early 2000s, we were designing business continuity for large organizations. That's my background, right? And I think that's where people stop. Business continuity, disaster recovery. What they're not adding is the unfortunate eventuality of a cyber attack. They're not adding that into the mix. So I think that's why they're feeling unprepared. And that's the big lesson. You've got to brush up those business continuity plans, those disaster recovery plans that you have, and make sure cyber recovery is in front and center of that. And I think that's why they're feeling unprepared. So they probably feel like, look, if I have a natural disaster, I have resiliency somewhere. But if I have a cyber attack, I'm really concerned. And I think that leads on to point number 2, leadership, not confidence. If you ask them, are you confident to recover from a cyber attack? They're less confident. And that's the stuff that counts. That's what's costing a lot of money, a lot of brand reputation, and in some instances costing people to lose their jobs if they haven't properly prepared for this.
And yeah, and that lack of confidence is because what people know that they haven't got the sort of level of comprehensive security and that they require. They understand that, or are they just reticent because until they've had an attack, they're just not sure, how robust they are at dealing with one. Where does that?
I think it's the latter. I think they're not sure how robust they are dealing with it. I think the security space, it's not from a lack of tools, if I can say that. Yeah. I think the security space has had a tool proliferation, which was insane, or in some areas, right? My view on that is I think organizations are starting to acknowledge that I look at 2 areas. I look at prevention and cure in a cyber resilience. And if you look at the NIST framework as an example, on the left-hand side of a NIST framework is all about making sure you have controls and measures to prevent that something bad can happen. On the right-hand side, they'll look at incident response and recover. There's just 2 elements with just a handful of controls. They almost got lazy in the resilience framework to say that, look, I've got to spend all my time and energy to avoid a breach, avoid a cyber attack at all costs, which does make sense, by the way. Don't get me wrong. You've got to do the best you can to stay protected. But I think the leadership aren't confident because there's not enough work on the right-hand side, which is about responding and recovery in this framework, which is that acknowledgement of 83% experienced the material breach. That means it's happening. They are getting breached. And I think they're not confident that they can recover from that event. So coming all the way back to tools, my controversial view is I think organizations perhaps spend too much time and energy and tooling on prevention and not enough time and energy, I wouldn't say necessarily just tooling, on recovery.
And it also sounds as if not enough time on testing. And is that because they are worried that if they test and something goes wrong and then the boss wants to know why the hell have we brought down our business when it wasn't even a proper attack, you've been testing and ruined, wrecked everything, or what's going on? Why the lack of testing, I guess?
Lack of testing is complexity and time. I would say. Just you mentioned some good points there. If I'm going to be testing, how intrusive is that on my business? Just that test environment, right? So I think they've lacked that capability to test. One idea could be build a sandbox environment to recover and test too, but that's costly. If you are an on-premise data center customer having to purchase all this hardware to go and do a test, plus your team, it's a huge investment. So many organizations, what I've noticed is their form of testing in a cyber is a tabletop exercise, which by the way is really good. And I think all organizations should not stop doing that. They should do that and do more of that. That's not a problem. Where they're lacking the confidence is because of the fact they're on-premise, they don't have hardware, it's labor intensive, it's intrusive, they don't do the actual test. So that's why we at Commvault are pretty excited about clean room recovery, our capability, because the cloud is perfect for that scenario, because you can spin the hardware up purely in the test scenario. And once you finish your test, you spin it down. So the cost is tiny compared to having to purchase spare hardware to do a test. So that's been really popular for that environment. Plus, the other problem we solve is the complexity. We build that runbook for recovery for you. So you are clicking, it's automated, you're clicking buttons, and you can see where Cloud Rewind fits in. If you are in the cloud, we could just Cloud Rewind to a certain point in a test scenario, bring back everything. Once you finish your testing, you could do forensics if you want or not. You just take it away. You just explode it. And it costs you just the test period. plus it's automated. So that's why we think we're solving a big problem with testing, because it is something we can do just in time and something you can automate. So hopefully that's going to help organizations test. But I do agree they're not confident because they haven't done the live test.
Right. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and clearly Commvault has been extraordinarily busy. So any normal organization might, say, right, we'll have a bit of a breather till the end of the year or whatever. But I imagine with Commvault that's not the case. So is there anything on the roadmap, whether it's specifics or your sort of general direction of travel, you can share as to what might be around the corner?
Our general road of travel is to solve what we're really calling the continuous, or allow for businesses to continue this continuous business view, and change the paradigm from static recovery to always on resilience. I think that's the way I would phrase it. And a lot of where we're going and the investments we're making is to allow organizations in this fairly complex multi-cloud world to stay resilient at all times. And so we're looking for more automation to make sure that things are always captured, understood, and resilient at all times. So that's the big area, and that's where you see lots of our investments happening. And that's why we're busy all the time. I mean, it's an exciting space, but we have to be busy because we have to stay ahead at all times.
Okay, it's been great to chat, and some brilliant insights into what's going on at Commvault, and thoughts about the, shall we say, the state of security, cyber resilience amongst end users. So, really appreciate the time you give me today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.